Welcome back to the channel. Today we are back on the 88 S10. It's going to be heater core, it's going to be clutch work, it's going to be making sure this thing moves now that it runs. We'll get into everything to make it safe and roadworthy and start driving it. Let's get to it. So I'm going to start on this heater core replacement. I've looped the one hose and I noticed a couple things. One, the bottom hose there, the clamp, the screw part of it is pointed down towards the inner fender. So I don't know how this guy got this heater hose on, or the factory did. It makes no sense to me. Second thing is, I'm going through the manual just to make sure I don't miss anything. Heater core replacement, coolant from radiator, inlet hose, outlet hose, blah blah blah. Rear cover, screws, brackets, core. So when we look at the picture, remove the rear cover. This is the front of the vehicle. The brackets, the radiator core. Simple. I'm not sure if they're forgetting something, but if this is the cover in the diagram, it's straight up and down. So, I mean, obviously the core is right there, behind there, but this dash comes down awfully low. So, we'll see what happens. Yeah, it quickly became apparent how naive and stupid I am. There's no way to get this out without either taking the dash out or accessing it through, there's an access door. You just unscrew that. But I watched a couple videos, and the 2 bolts that you need to get to by taking out that access door are not very accessible once you take that door off. One's down to the right, one's down to the left, kind of behind the radio. So like I said, I watched a couple videos, and some people were taking out the radio. Some people were taking the dash out. And then some people were saying, oh no, it's easy. You just take the top of the dash out, drop the steering column, which involves taking all those panels off under the column, and then you can pull the dash away, but I imagine you have to unbolt it because there's a bracket here. And then we're like, oh yeah, don't forget unhook the ECM as well on this side. And then other people were chiming in the comments that they forgot steps. So yeah, I'm gonna take that panel off inside the glove box and see what I can see. I mean, maybe I was expecting way too much than the procedure that just says take the cover off, take the 2 brackets off, take the heater core out. Done. I mean, I figured it was kind of behind stuff, but you know, they should probably mention, you know, remove the dash. What's the best way to remove the dash? What do you have to do? Do you have to unplug the ECM and drop the steering wheel? No mention of that whatsoever. There's the first one under the hose above the cable. And the other one is allegedly right down there behind the radio. I don't know what the point of this access door is. Alright, let's see if I can get these out. Let's do a next day recap on the heater core. So it was quite the effort to get it out. Let's keep in mind that there are 5 steps. So basically what I had to do is remove the entire dashboard except for some of the driver's side. So there's 4 bolts up top, 2 in the vents. There's 1 down here near the kick panel, same on the driver's side. There's 1 here, right about here in the center. Of course, I removed all the plastic on the bottom, and all of this, I had to take the radio out and all this stuff. All of this was to get the 2 bolts that you can't get to from going up underneath here to get that heater core out. Plus you need the room because when you take the cover off, it needs to clear the heater core. So there's 1 bolt right behind the radio here on the right side of the radio. So that was easy enough to get to once you took the radio out. There's a bolt over there, which is hard to see. I think it's showing up on camera. It's right there where the bolt hole is because I have the cover off already. So basically you take this panel off in the back of the glove box, and that gets you access to nothing. And then after removing all these bolts, I was able to pull the dash forward and push it down, and that exposed that nut, that bolt. When it came time to remove the heater core, you got to pull the cover out far enough to clear the heater core, and it's stuffed inside the vent on this side, so you can't pull it out this way. You have to pull it from the right hand side. Well, this vent actuator is in the way, so I took that off, and then it came out and I was able to drop it down. I quickly realized though that the heater core was beyond repair. I was going to try to fix it. The bottom had just fallen out of it. I mean, it was just completely exploded. And this one tube, I don't know how it was put in, but the clamp, the nut side, was down on the inner fender. So I ended up pulling the heater core through and just cutting it off. I also realized that when I bought this, the passenger side carpet was soaking wet, and I was like, oh, one of the windows must have been leaking, but there was no evidence of any water coming in through the door, on the door panel, over the dashboard. So I think that heater core had exploded at some point. Helpful tip on the brake release: to get this piece out so you can get this plastic out, pull the brake release, and then you have to look up under, and the lever that releases the e-brake to come back up, once you pull this, hold the lever with your hand and then pull this back out. I don't understand, you know, the panel that goes here covers this and it goes under the steering column, and then there's another panel that goes under that. So in order to change this flasher and this relay, I'll have to find out what these are actually for. You either have to take off all these panels or you have to come up from behind, and I'm not even sure if you can get, because there's like a little panel, a little metal panel that's holding these. So I don't even know if you can get them from back there. I'll have to look into that and replace them now. Another problem area was, this is the light for the glove box. It's in the dash here, and then when the door shuts, it's the button. This connector was a real pain in the butt to get off, and I wasn't sure which way to attack it, because there's a clips here and then there were clips here. So I went with the connector on the wire, and it's really sketchy because, you know, this plastic is so brittle. But I managed to slip it off, and it's just so brittle though. That's probably why all these parts are, you know, worth money, because they just break so easily. Like underneath here, these are all broken. The panel I took off under the steering column, the screw places were broken, but I have the pieces, so I'm gonna try to glue them and reinforce them with like duct tape or something on the back. We have more of these, you know, connectors. So these were obviously used to run more speakers. These are the worst connectors, where you like snap them and they splice the wires, and they're just horrible. So that's coming out. Now that fixing this heater core is not going to happen, I have one on order. It's aluminum, where that one was copper, so I'm hopeful. You know, new parts are sometimes garbage, but we'll try it. So we're probably all thinking it, and I was thinking it too. Now's the time to replace this dashboard. Got a crack here, and it looks like someone either threw a fit and was punching this, but you know, there's some cracks here, stuff missing, a crack here. There's another crack on the other side where the speaker grill is. So these dashboards, of course, because they turn to just brittle plastic, are just difficult to find, and when you find them, they're $300, $400, $500, and I don't want to spend that kind of money on this dashboard. And now's the time to do it, but I don't want to do it now, because now is also not the time to do it, because I want to get this thing on the road and driving. So I'm going to clean this and live with it. It'll be fine. It'll be functional. Someday down the road, you know, when I regret not doing it now, I'll probably replace it. Who knows? I just want to show why I hate this manual so much. First of all, it's 3 different manuals, plus one that I didn't know I needed for the fuel system, which I don't have. But heater core replacement: remove or disconnect figures 2 and 13. So here's figure 2, and 13 is just, you know, heater core, the cover. We've got 151 to 162 and number 14 as far as on the diagram. So coolant from the radiator, inlet 32, outlet 33. Plug or cap the hoses. Now we all know what the hoses are, that's not the point of this. So we know figure 13 doesn't have 32 and 33, so figure 2. No, figure 2 doesn't have it either. It's actually on, well for me it's figure 15. So we'll continue. Rear cover 158 and screws 14, figure 13, which we already saw. Self-explanatory. Brackets, core. Boom, 5 steps. Here's the manual for my 62 Dart. Removing or installing heater core. To remove heater core, refer to figure 4, then proceed as follows. Perform operations 1 through 7 under heater housing removal. They actually divide the heater housing removal in 2 different parts. One's from the driver's side, which is the driver compartment, and one is from the engine compartment. And here we go. You know, it's pretty self-explanatory. Remove 2 screws, carefully withdraw the temperature control valve from the opening, disconnect heater hose, remove water valve, remove 10 screws attaching the heater core housing to the cowl panel, blah blah blah. Back to here. Insert a small screwdriver between the cowl and the heater housing and carefully pry the heater housing away from the cowl. Remove the 3 screws attaching the heater core to the heater housing. Carefully remove the heater core. So it's a little more intuitive and step by step. You know exactly how many screws you're removing. You know exactly how to remove it by carefully prying. Nice diagram with actual picture-like images, where this is like, I don't know, Fisher-Price coloring book kind of drawings. This book is so cool. Look at these pictures. Probably drawings, actually. There we go. Where am I? There we go. 440 2-door hardtop. I use this for my Valiant as well, because the Lancer is basically the Valiant. Look at that, huh? Just so much detail in here. The pictures are just so good. I like this. When I did the front suspension, I was looking at this, and they actually give you tool numbers. Using tool C3560 Dodge and tool C3714 for Lancer. Not that I had these tools, but it's just a nice detail. And I could go on and on with this book. And bulkhead wiring connector. That's exactly what it looks like without taking a physical picture of it. They don't make them like they used to. It's another day. We're back on the 88 S10. Today's goal is to get it to move. So I need to do some clutch stuff and some oil stuff, and we'll get into it, but first I need to get it up in the air. Step 1, I'm going to remove the line from the clutch master from the slave cylinder, then I'll take the slave cylinder out of the trans. Everything so far is 13 millimeter. Excuse me. Okay, it's loose, but the hose isn't loose. I don't know if I care. Everything's coming out anyway. I'll take the slave cylinder off and then just twist it off the line. I want to break this plastic. All the plastic on this truck is just cheap. Oh, GM Neverlast plastic. So there's the oil pressure switch, which I couldn't get off because I need to get vice grips on it because the oil filter was in the way. Plus I had to take off the switch for the oil pressure gauge because it's not just a light, it's a gauge. I wanted to make sure I ordered the right switch. This is the correct oil pressure switch for the gauge. It's actually listed as the rally gauge. This one was broken in half, but I wanted to make sure I had the right one with the 3 prongs. So all this means that in order to make sure this thing moves, I need to actually replace the switch, so I might as well replace the other one while I'm at it. And I have to take off the oil filter to do that, so I might as well change the oil. It's the whole snowball effect. Next up is the clutch master cylinder, which are those two nuts there. And there's a little clip for the pedal. I noticed the clutch pedal has some movement side to side. It's probably got plastic bushings, but that's something I can deal with later. Problem is the line from the master down, it's so rotted onto the master, I can't really get it off or get to it. And this rod is, there's like a clip inside, and so we'll see if we can get this out of here with the line attached. So looking at old versus new, the clutch master cylinder, this one still pumps, but it's just full of rusty garbage, and it's all rusted around this grommet. It's not worth trying to salvage. But the good news is the new one seems to have the same configuration. This thing will spin around, so I can point it where it needs to be. It was just like this in the package. The only thing I did notice is the old one is flat, and it seems to have a gasket or remnants of one, where this one is not flat. I might have to make like a foam gasket for this one. The cylinder, same configuration. It came with a new rod. Although this seems a little larger, this section, it's still pointed in the same direction. So I got everything in. I got the slave cylinder in. Even though it's the same like configuration, everything's pointing in the same direction. The bleeder on the new one is higher, and this thing is larger. So I put a rubber cap on it and kind of pushed it up so fluid can come out. But as you can probably see, it is just shoved way up near the transmission. You gotta unplug this thing to even get to it, to loosen it. As far as this goes, I ordered the longer one because it was easier to get. The shorter one, I don't know if the bends are different because it's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't exactly fit like the original, but nothing does. So I'll be keeping the original parts just in case. Maybe I can find like a rebuild kit if this stuff doesn't work out. The new clutch master cylinder is in. That went pretty easy, as well as the new oil pressure switch for the gauge. I mean, it's just ridiculous how that's set up. It's even hard to see, but the black thing's for the gauge, and then there's the switch for, I don't know what else, probably detecting pressure for the ECM. So unlike the oil pressure switch for the gauge that has, well, this is actually not even millimeters. I think this is 9/16. It's one of the few things that's not millimeters. But it has the nut thing on the end, so you can actually turn it, where this doesn't. Now, my assumption is there's some kind of special wrench or probably socket to fit this. But you couldn't get a socket on there, you know, unless you pulled the motor, so I don't know what they were thinking with this. I'm going to let this thing gravity bleed. The slave cylinder actually, when you put it into the transmission, it pushes it all the way in, so it doesn't really accept a lot of fluid. It's getting cold here, of course, because that's where I live, and I haven't put heat in this garage. Not that it would hold it anyway. So we're working as fast as possible. And of course, this has become a workbench, which I hate doing when the cars are workbenches, but when you're short on space, you gotta do what you gotta do. Here we are next day. I think I'm ready to see if this clutch works. I've charged the battery, I've changed the oil and the oil filter, I've done the oil pressure switch and the other switch, I've done the clutch master and the hose here, and then the lower hose, and then the slave valve. I know the first time I ran it, it seemed to idle really high, I don't know if that was because, you know, the air cleaner wasn't on and certain things weren't plugged in, or if it's like the IC or something like that. Who knows? But if something's faulty, maybe we'll get a code that we can decipher. Engage. Okay, that oil pressure should read correctly now. I don't think the RPM is reading correctly. I know the battery's not charging because the alternator is not hooked up. Let's see if that axle will spin. Brakes work. Somewhat. Let's go for a ride. We can't go for a ride because, like I said, the alternator is not charging and the battery's dead. So for some reason the plug to the alternator is missing and all these wires are cut. I don't know why, but surprisingly, one of the few things that's made for this truck is the alternator plug. Now, I found it on Summit and a bunch of other places. It was like $70, $80, but Napa had it for like 20 bucks shipped to my house. I'm gonna grab the wiring diagram, see if we can figure this out, charge the battery up, and then we can go for a ride. So I'm trying to get this alternator to charge and hook up that new pigtail, but I don't have the wiring diagram as far as what wires go where. So I have a brown wire and a pink wire with a black stripe. And the connector has 4 connectors, but only 3 of them in the actual pigtail. So I was lucky enough to find this. The regulator has 4 terminals, PLIS. Okay. And then it goes through what each is connected to. PLIS. It says refer to the wiring diagram. So starter and charging 2.8. PLFS. Now the issue is which one is P, which one is L and F and S, because the connector has a large connector on one end and then the other 3 are small. What I do know is pink is for the tach, which sounds strange to me, but the pink wire is coming from the gauge cluster. So this is the cluster with the fuel gauge, voltmeter, and tachometer. It doesn't have dummy lights. So it says without tach, pink wire. With tach, pink wire. My understanding is the voltmeter, if it's just a dummy light, that's the resistor. If it has a gauge, I believe the resistor is a light next to the voltmeter. No one's actually explicitly said that. I can't find it in any of the documentation in these manuals, but that's what I'm going with. So I'm going with S as the large connector, which apparently I don't need because S would be battery power, and battery power goes to a different connector on the alternator. So all I need is pink and brown. So here we go. I got pink and brown temporarily wired up to this connector. So from what I can tell, I don't need the large gauge wire going to battery power because I already have a wire going to the battery. Plus, it's not on the diagram here under S. The S terminal may be wired to the battery to sense voltage. Maybe. It actually says P, L, and S are optional. I is the only one that's not optional, even though I and L are the same thing, or F and L, depending on which book you're looking at. They're both labeled S10. Needless to say, my frustration is great. So I'm going to hook up the battery, unhook the battery charger, hopefully it starts, hopefully it charges. 12 volt. I don't think that's enough. front brakes are stuck, but it moves, it stops. It is definitely not charging. I don't know if it's the alternator or I've got the wiring hooked up wrong, but the brakes work, power steering works. Brakes. Let's talk brakes. So, front disc, rear drum. The rear drum, they seem fine. They work. They look to be fairly new. I did decide to replace the wheel cylinders. I just don't want to have to deal with it later. I peeked inside. They look okay, but everything else looks really good, so figured why not. I got the rear brake hose for it. Front brakes, a little bit of a different story. Obviously I'm going to replace the brake hoses. The discs, I don't know. They're kind of thin on one side. The pads have a lot of meat on them. I mean, I think this truck was serviced before it was parked. The calipers, you know, I could probably clean them up. They would probably work fine. You know, I might find some rust in here. You know, I don't even know if you can get seals, but I could probably rebuild them. Passenger side was a little worse as far as it was just locked up, but that's probably a lot to do with the brake hose. It's probably all collapsed inside, you know, and the fluid can't return from the caliper. So, not a big deal. The disc kind of suffers from the same, thin on one side, not the other, but workable. The master cylinder, like I said, the brakes work. So it's nothing terrible. The only thing I was worried about with this was, you know, this piece is just kind of deformed. I don't know how well it would seal. So I tried to order this new, but you can only get it for manual brakes, and it's different. All the lines look really good. I don't see a lot of rot. So in the end, I decided to replace the rear wheel cylinders, obviously the hoses, and I'm just redoing the front brakes entirely. And I also got a new master cylinder. The main reason is because the kid's going to be driving this, so I don't want to have any issues. The other reason is it's starting to get winter here, getting cold, and you know, if a seal breaks on a wheel cylinder or a caliper or something goes with the master, I don't want to deal with it when it's negative 100 degrees outside. I was replacing the rear wheel cylinders, thought this would be the easy part, and I immediately started taking this nut off, and then I realized that's not holding them on. So I opened up the package, and there's a clip on the back. So here's the new clip. Here's the old one that I mangled. And basically, once I got it off, I kind of realized that when this is on, you can take a nail and put it in this groove and then bend this clip out, and then it just kind of pops off on the inside. So here's the kicker. This one is a little loose, which I don't like. This side was even worse, so I took it off and I put the one remaining old clip I had, and it is rock solid. It is not going anywhere. Back on the brakes today. I got the rears done, got the wheel cylinders in and the new line. Fronts are completely disassembled. I'm working on the master. So these came free pretty easy, but they're stuck to the line. So I managed to get this one unstuck because this nut has to spin on the line. So this one spun, this one didn't, this one didn't. I got this one to spin. So we're gonna pull this off, bench bleed the new one, and continue on these front brakes. Last thing I want to do is, you know, just twist this off and twist the brake line. It's still good. It's just a little stuck. Every time I do this, I wish I had a nice set of you know, brake line, gas line, wrenches, and then I completely forget about it and never mind. Rotors are clean, bearings are packed, everything's greased up, seal is on. So one thing I noticed was the outer bearing has like a Teflon cage, which I've never seen before. The originals I pulled off looked the same. I actually thought they were worn down because, as you can see, there's more of the roller on the top than the bottom. Or maybe you can't. Washer, nut. I usually go to its tight and then back it off like a quarter of that. What I'll do is put a dab in the cap and just clean my glove off with it. Just for a little added grease in there. Tap that sucker home. Don't forget the cotter pin like I did. I'll do caliper first. There's a clip that comes with the pads that you just clip on the inside pad. I just use anti-seize on everything. It works fine. There's two ways this line can come out of here. This way, at least on the new ones, it can go out the side. So you got to make sure it's the same because it'll bind up. I really don't like these clips, like screw on. I like the ones that actually clip on, because you just clip them on. These are very difficult to get off when they're rusty. Bracket, tighten up the line, tighten the caliper. Freshly bled master cylinder, which by the way appears to have the same gasket under the cap as what's pictured for the manual brake gasket, which I was just going to replace that, but whatever, pictures could be wrong. Of course, these are the like cone shape studs where there's no thread at the beginning, and you got to compress this master to get it on. Fun. Okay, I'm stupid. This goes on first. I am a dummy. Look how much easier that is when you do it right. I freed up these lines. Just got to put them in the right spot. The instructions on this say to bleed the line closest to the master first. I've never heard of that. I mean, I bench bled it, so I don't see why there would be an issue. So we're just going to start at the farthest. I just need to phone a friend. Brakes are bled, no leaks. Get this puppy back on the ground and see what happens. Before I set that rear down, I'm going to test the rear brakes. See what happens. Hear that hissing sound? I don't know what that is. It idles a little bit too high. My understanding is temperature gauge can affect that, because that kind of tells the IAC what to do. And the temperature gauge wasn't working, so I replaced the sensor and we'll get it out and heat it up and see what happens. But I also bought an IAC just in case. Stops better than a new car. I put 5 gallons in it, so a quarter tank roughly. That seems right. It's up from nothing. Oil pressure looks right. Battery, if that's right, it's not charging enough. And the temperature gauge doesn't seem to be moving. And I just replaced the sensor. It's got to be more than nothing. I don't know what that hissing is. The floor. Time to address the floor. I was going to put it off, but I want to get this interior back together. And before I clean up this dashboard and the windows and everything else, it's time to make a mess. So this floor is not rusty, as we've covered before, but the truck is galvanized, and it appears that the air, or just being exposed for some reason, the paint's coming off the galvanized. Like every day I can scrape more and more paint off. I don't understand. But we're gonna take off as much as possible. I mean, look at this. This was not like this a few days ago. It's completely flaking off. Since this was oxidation, and I looked it up, it's zinc oxidation. So basically the galvanized metal is sacrificing the zinc in it to keep the metal from rusting. I get that. What I don't understand is why it's so severe. Like, why was this such a problem for, you know, this past however many weeks or months it's been? I don't know. I had some white vinegar because I was going to use it in the radiator to get rid of some of the calcium deposits. So I figured I'd try it on this, and it immediately really seemed to knock it down a lot. I see a lot more of the galvanized than I do of the oxidation. Obviously it's eating at some of the rust too, which is, I'm okay with that. But I can't spend, you know, days on this, so I'm gonna let it soak. I've been brushing it. I'll come back and brush it a few more times, neutralize it with some water, and I gotta move on to painting it and primering it and painting it and see if that sticks. Got a carpet on the way, so gotta keep this project moving forward, but it did definitely knock it down a lot, which is good. And from last night to today, I don't see too much more of the paint flaking off, so hopefully this will at least make it better, if not completely resolve it. Here's where I'm at. I scrubbed it with the vinegar a couple times. I let it soak for an hour or two, and then I went back and hit it with hot water and scrubbed it and cleaned it out. There's an airplane like right above me right now. Look at that bad boy. Okay, so I scrubbed it and all that, and I let it dry. I blew it out with the air compressor, and I came back to check it just to make sure it's dry, and hit it with the air compressor again just to make sure, and it blew paint all over the place. So it's like every time I address it, it just, more paint comes up. At this point, I'm just gonna shoot it with some primer and see what we get. I don't really have another choice. It's an unseasonably mild day today, so we're gonna move forward so we can move forward. I've got primer on. I'll let this dry up and then hit it with some paint and call it done. The floor is done, and it is pretty red, but it'll be covered by carpet. Not the same red as the truck, but it doesn't matter. So this was a little bit of red I had left over when I did the Dart. I bought some different cans of red and this didn't match. So I'm going to end this one here. The next video, I'm going to do everything needed to get this thing roadworthy. Until the next time, thanks for watching.